Hello, welcome back everybody to Light4j tutorial by Coding Muscles. This is chapter 3 where we will be creating a simple get service and we'll be looking at some configuration files such as values.yml and handler.yml. So this is going to be a short tutorial, but we have to do some code, so let's get into it. So a get service is the first thing we create when we are learning any new REST framework. For example, in Springboot, we annotate the class with REST controller, and then we have a get mapping where the URL maps, and we return whatever data we have to return. Like in this case, we are returning a hello world string. But in case of Node.js, what we do is we create a few constants, do the mapping of hello, send the response, and open our application to listen to one of the port. So we're gonna do something similar, but with Light4j. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my desktop, open up my IntelliJ. Okay, so light 1 is already open. So let me just run that and see if the server info is working. HTTP 8443. Okay, looks good. Server info. Okay, it is working, so my server is up. So in Light4j, the first place that a request hits is the handler.yml file. So if we do a Control Shift N and search for handler.yml, click on this button that is gonna open up the file location in the pane so we can see which hierarchy is the file lying in. From the very top, we see that there are some handlers defined here. Then we have a chain, and then we have paths. Now the paths would seem similar to you if you have done any of the REST framework before, whether it be Spring, Spring Boot, Node.js, anything. So starting from the very top, here we have paths. This path is one endpoint. This path is another endpoint. This path is also another endpoint, and so on and so forth. So here we see we have server/info, and this is very similar to the one we call from our Postman. So let's see what's happening here. So what happens here is, in first line we define what the endpoint is. In second line we define what the method is, like which HTTP method is it going to follow. Is it going to be get, put, post, patch, whatever. In this execute tag, we have provided security and info. So if we do a Control C and Control F on security to search it in this file, we see it has a couple of occurrences. It's also in one of the chain. Right here, security. So basically, it is a reference to this particular class. So what's going to happen is, if if we call server.info from here, like every time I do click here, so after reaching the handler file, it tries to map the same URL. It sees the word security and goes up to find where it is defined in handlers. So this class is executed. So we can go ahead and search this class. The shortcut for searching any file in IntelliJ is Control Shift and N. There we go. So what happens is, in any of the handler, always the handle request method is called, and all the payload path variable as well as the headers are received in the exchange itself. So this so once this is completed, it goes back and info is called. Now what does info do? It maps to this class, server info get handler. So let's do a Control Shift N to see what's happening in this class. So what happens is, it has also implemented the light HTTP handler as all handlers do, and its handle request is called. Now what is happening here is, it picks up some config, and if config has enabled server, it creates a map in itself. In the exchange, it puts the content type as JSON, and then sends it back to after writing it as a string value, the info map that it just created. So if you want to debug this, let's go ahead and debug this. So I'm gonna put a breakpoint here. I'm gonna rerun this in the debug mode. And as we hit send, okay, it caught the debugger. Let's see what we have in config. We have a variable that is enable server info, which is set to true. So what we have in config is a boolean that is set to true, and that's why it has gone in. And server info.get exchange has some key value pairs, which is deployment, environment, security, and component. And they internally have another map, and so on and so forth. All right, so we're gonna let this play. And now let's take all this to JSON editor online. Just paste everything. Okay, and these are the same four things that were there in the debug window. And this is the same thing that is we get as a response when we hit the server.info. So basically, in just in handle request, everything is happening, and we set the exchange and return back the object right here. So if we have to create our own custom get method, we're gonna follow the same suit, which means path hello method will be get, and execution will be hello world. Let's go ahead. Now, before I do any entry here, let me just go to my handler class, create a new handler. All right, hello handler is here. So I see that all of them have implemented the light HTTP handler. So I am no exception. So I'm going to do a implements light HTTP handler, and I'm going to implement all the methods, which is just one handle request. So all I need to do here is HTTP server exchange, get response sender, hello world. I'll do another thing. I'll set the status code to 200, which means okay. So let me debug this application. Oh, okay. So the error here is that I did not provide the class name for my hello handler. So let me just copy the path and replace all the slashes with dots and remove .java. All right, good to go. Oh, so there should have been a space here. Okay, so the YML files are very strict about their spacing. So I was spending the last 2 minutes into finding the discrepancy that there should have been a space here. Hopefully everything will run fine now. All right, port started. So let me just duplicate this request. All right, we got hello world, and the status code of this request was 200. Okay. So once again, let's have a look at how the Lite4j get service worked. As soon as I hit the request from Postman, it first goes to the handler YAML file and maps to this slash hello. It gets to know that it is a get request, and then the hello world is searched throughout this file. So here we have the at hello handler. So it tries to find this file at this given location, which is right here. It goes into the handle request method. All we are doing here is setting the status code to 200 and returning hello world. So that's it for the get service. All right, back to the presentation. So let's do some head-to-head comparison from for Spring versus Lite4j service. So we all know that in Spring or Spring Boot, the request starts with controller, and it is defined by an annotation of REST controller, while in Lite4j, the endpoints are defined in handler YAML. In Spring Boot, path variables, body, which is also called payload, and headers are sent separately, whereas in Lite4j, there's an exchange object that contains all of those. And flow in a typical Spring Boot application is as such. We reach the controllers method first, which has the mapping. Then it goes to service, and service calls the necessary DB connections. Whereas in Lite4j, we have handler YAML file, and it goes to its corresponding handler class file, which may eventually call a service, which can eventually call a database connection. And all the path variables and payload are in Exchange object only. And in Spring and Spring Boot, everything has to be managed by the API, while handlers in Lite4j take care of all the cross-cutting concerns. Now, what do we mean by when we say that handlers take care of all the cross-cutting concerns? Currently, the API that we created is a very, very basic one. And if you look at the other APIs that were there, for example, server.info, there was a security component to it. And if you look forward to what it calls is, it call so what it calls is JWT verify handler, which would be performing the necessary JWT token verification. This is where power of Lite4j comes in, where we can where we can just chain all those operations in one key tag named default and call those default everywhere. So what happens when we do a v1 slash pet? A default gets triggered, which means all these get triggered, which means all of them are called one by one, and only after then this class is called the pets handler, which will be right here. So this is how handler.yml works. And that's all for chapter 3. Thanks for tuning in to Coding Muscles, and I'll see you next time.